We are pleased to introduce our last panel before lunch, entitled New Frontiers in AI plus Biotechnology. The conversation will be moderated by Olivia Zetter, Strategic Advisor and Venture Partner at Arch Venture Partners. Please welcome our panelists, Dr. Alexander Titus, Commissioner on the NSCEB, Dr. Raphael Townshend, CEO of Atomic AI, and Emily Negrin, Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Inari.
Great. Well, first, I want to say thank you to the Commission for organizing this incredible event and hosting us here today, and to my fellow panelists for joining me in this conversation. AI has really revolutionized how we do science across many different scientific areas, and none more so than biotech and life science. It is changing how we discover new medicines and design them from scratch, even if they don't exist in nature. It is allowing us to learn how biology is working and understand it in fundamentally new ways. And it's allowing us to apply the life sciences to other industrial areas, agriculture, material science, in ways that have never been done before. So to start this panel, I would love to hear a little bit about how each of you are applying AI in your own work, and also what are you excited about for this new future?
So Atomic AI really is a company that is centered around applying AI for rational drug design specifically. And this is something that I've been particularly excited about for some time here, really taking biology from more of a guess and check kind of field to something that we can engineer over time. And so we see AI like breakthroughs like AlphaFold and others really bringing us towards that kind of future overall. And really at Atomic, what we're doing is we're leveraging these kind of technologies in the RNA space, collecting foundational data sets to train these foundational models to enable these kind of rational drug design kind of applications.
So Inari is the seed design company, and we've built a technology platform that brings together AI-enabled predictive design with multiplex gene editing in order to breed plants that will produce significantly more without using more resources. And we're able to do this in about 3 to 4 years instead of the traditional 10 to 15 years, which it usually takes to breed new plants. Now you can think of multiplex gene editing as CRISPR tools. And if you know anything about CRISPR, it's basically a pair of scissors with a GPS system. And I'm sure everyone here can appreciate that GPS is worthless if you don't know where you're going. That's where AI-enabled predictive design comes into play. We are working to understand exactly where in the genome to make an edit and what type of edit to make in order to drive the change we're looking for within the plant. So I'm going to illustrate this with a quick example so you can really understand the speed and power that this is moving. So if you would collect all the data that was available on soybeans. And for reference, soybeans have 50,000 genes in their genome. Us as humans have about 20,000. Plants are far more complicated. So when you collected all the data in 2022, we had knowledge on 200 of the genes. And of those 200, we could identify that about 50 of them had an impact on yield. So we put our AI-enabled predictive design system to work. And by 2023, we had identified an additional 53 gene candidates that could have an impact on yield. By the end of 2024, we identified 1,200. That gives you the idea of the speed and power that we're able to leverage with AI. And that's what I'm really excited about, because there's so much potential within the plant genomes that will give us opportunities to really build a more resilient and stable food system.
Yeah, this is super cool to be here. So just for a little bit of context, I'm Alexander Titus. I go by Titus. I'm one of the commissioners on the NSCEB. The report came out 6 years to the day from when I started working on this in the national security context. And it's been almost exactly 10 years since I started working on AI in the life sciences. And I've worked on projects ranging from cancer biology. I used to be another project, I used to be the head of AI for a little project that was announced on Monday called the Direwolf when I was at Colossal, and I'm now in my day job, lead AI at a genetic medicine company called Avidity Biosciences, which is really focused on RNA therapeutics. I give this breadth because the reason I'm on the commission is because we can use these tools for so many things, for agriculture, for therapeutics, for de-extinction, and really the decision is how do we use these tools. In 2015, when I started working on this project, the reviewers for my paper said there's no reason anyone would ever study latent biology and these things. And now it's a geopolitical competition for who can do it best. And so that's why I'm so passionate about being kind of the AI bio guy on the commission, is that the future is everything that we just described. And so it's going to be really cool.
If you haven't seen the photos of the direwolves, I highly recommend Googling them. They are very cool and exciting. Titus, tell us a little bit more about where the commission sees the future of the nexus between AI and biotech. And also, what are some of the challenges that we still face to be able to really unlock the potential of these two technology areas?
Honestly, I don't think the commission sees it as a nexus. I think it sees it as the future of biotechnology is AI and biotechnology. There is no more non-data-driven biology in the future. And so the recommendations that we're looking at in this context are lots around how do we treat biotech data or biology data as a national asset. And how do we take advantage of the biodiversity in our country as a national asset. And so we have recommendations around how do we understand AI-ready data? How do we make sure that we understand how to measure and collect? How do we have a web of biodata so that everyone knows how to go and use this stuff? My PhD was 100% based on NIH publicly available data from the Cancer Genome Atlas. So I am a personal beneficiary of great high-quality data. And so how do we do that for everyone? So we think about how do we activate a network of cloud labs so that we can collect data systematically with the standards that we have from NIST and others. Drew talked very much. He's very fond of our NIST colleagues in biometrology. So you put all these things together, and then you layer on our ability to activate the private sector strategically and how the government can be a good partner. And that's how we really want to see is data is the foundation of the future, not something that you try to analyze after you've done an experiment.
And this data question is really one that's essential to progressing applications of AI across use cases. And one of the challenges that we've seen within the life sciences is that so much of the data that's needed is lacking. And really the knowledge as well. There's so much about the human body that we still don't understand fundamentally, and we don't have an internet to scrape and train on the same way that exists for, say, LLMs in training them to be applied to consumer use cases. So Raphael, how are you thinking about this data challenge in your work? And what are some things the industry can do to help advance it?
I mean, fundamentally, I think I very much agree with Titus and all the comments been made here. It's like data is really what powers these AI advances. If you throw garbage in, you're going to get garbage out fundamentally. And I saw this, for example, I worked on the AlphaFold team a few years back where we saw the breakthroughs of protein folding based on these massive data sets, this protein data bank that had been collected over 80 years of structural biologists collecting these kind of data sets, building them very accurately, putting the right metadata around it, and designing these things. And it was almost like AI ready, almost unintentionally. Mm-hmm. And I fundamentally believe that you need these other kinds of AI-ready data sets to be produced at this scale. Most data sets out there that are held by major pharmaceuticals or other groups today are sort of built with a different purpose in mind, really, going after very specific drug programs, et cetera. And there's this other kind of data, and this is what we focus on at Atomic as well, that is much more large scale, much more diverse in terms of what you're collecting, much more reproducible, lots of metadata around it. And so we focus on collecting that sort of data in the RNA space specifically, these foundational data sets, so to speak, to be able to train these kind of foundational models. And really that's key, right, is those data sets. And so we find that a lot of the value of what we build is, obviously the AI algorithms are powerful in of themselves, but it's really about building that information fundamentally. And so applying these kinds of approaches, figuring out how to scale these data sets to be AI ready, is a lot of, I believe, where the future lies here and how we really enable AI writ large in biotechnology.
And is this a space where there are areas for collaboration between, say, companies within the industry or between government-funded entities like large-scale biobanks that could help solve this challenge and advance the whole field?
100%. You need these collaborations. You have a lot of data sort of under, like in private entities, you have a lot of public data as well that needs to be collated and cleaned up in the right sort of ways. And there's this shared interest in many ways. You can unlock many new capabilities with these kinds of approaches. And so there's really almost this win-win at play here where it's, if you can build these right data sets, you can enable private industry applications, you can enable fundamental academic research at the same time together to make this happen. So this has been something that I've been a big evangelist for the last few years at this point of like, how can we leverage both the public and private kind of efforts together to enable these kind of strategic data assets fundamentally.
And staying on this topic of data for another minute, Emily, the seed banks that you work with are essentially these massive data storage vaults and have so much opportunity to help us learn about different types of plants, about our agricultural future. Tell us a little bit more about how you're using AI to unlock that data. And will this allow us to build a more resilient and secure food supply for the future?
Absolutely. So I talked to you a little bit about how we're using AI-enabled systems to really help us understand the data. And when you think about the fact that, talked about the soybeans, 50,000 genes in the genomes, our human brains cannot possibly take 50,000 genes from one variety and compare it to 50,000 genes of another variety. But computers can. So we can use that technology to quickly find similarities and patterns so that our scientists can better use time and resources moving forward concepts that we have a really high level of confidence in. And so our first wave of products are focused on making dramatic increases in yield in our three primary crops, which is soybeans, corn, and wheat. So those crops on average see about a 1% yield increase year over year right now. We're aiming to increase that up to 20% in some of these crops. So now you can start to understand the significant jump you can make when you know how to use the information within the seeds. But that's really just the starting point. And one of the really exciting things, especially when we think about this, is gene editing is a method in breeding that gives us the ability to dramatically increase diversity within species. So that in and of itself helps us create more resiliency within agriculture. But there's all these other really unique opportunities. So we have wild type varieties of plants. These are ones that have no commercial value to farmers. They may be low quality, they don't yield well, whatever it is. But some of them have some incredible singular traits that help us address drought tolerance, disease. But to cross those into commercial varieties and pull out that one single trait that you want and not all the other garbage, it's virtually impossible with traditional breeding. But gene editing lets us start thinking and doing these things. So now we can take the best pieces of information and apply those to the seeds that give our farmers the greatest value. That's where we're going to start really making step change differences in what we're able to do. And it's something that, I joke a lot of times that seeds are actually just little treasure troves of data, and we need to protect them. And it's not just companies like Inari or other even larger agriculture companies. We're talking about universities, and the USDA manages the National Plant Genome System. That needs to be well funded and protected because that's where a lot of those wild types are. That's where there's all this unlocked information that we haven't really begun to fully grasp. And China understands the importance of investing heavily in agriculture, the basic R&D. And as they continue to increase their funding, we continue to decrease ours. And it is a major problem. And companies, universities, all of us are dependent on basic agriculture R&D research in order to launch these further innovations. So we really need to start thinking critically about how we're spending our money if we're going to be serious about food security.
I think the other, just to add one comment to this, is part of the data that we rarely talk about in like an AI bio context is the data around that. So like in an ag setting, the humidity, the satellite surveillance, things like that. In a healthcare context, what were the other drugs that are going on? And that's something that is not an other data as assigned, right? That is the critical conditions for something to happen. So having a sequence from a seed is one thing, but everything you have around how the farmer operates tells you why that sequence might have worked.
And Emily, you raised China's investment in the agricultural space. They're also investing heavily in AI as well as in biotech. Titus, what are some of the concerns and things that keep the commission up at night about the strategic competition between the US and China, in particularly this intersection of AI and biotechnology? We all saw the gains with DeepSeek that were incredibly impressive. How are you now thinking about this as it relates to how we can stay ahead in bio?
The thing that DeepSeek and other events like this show us is that there is no guaranteed lead, right? Someone said that earlier today, and there's no way to say, if Facebook had released DeepSeek, it wouldn't have been nearly as much of a moment. But what happened is it showed us that there are other players that we had never even heard of until they became players. And that's one of the things that we talk a lot about is, what is biology's ChatGPT moment? And we don't have the answer to that. But like the Cyber Solarium was started in 2019, SolarWinds was in 2020. The AI Commission is in 2019, ChatGPT was launched in 2022. So these commissions are started because the world starts to think these are important technologies, and then we get surprised by a major event. For good or bad, ChatGPT, right? It was more positive than bad. SolarWinds, more bad than positive. I don't know if you can say it's positive at all, but what is the biology version? We have no idea. We have no way to predict that, right? The CRISPR baby a couple years ago might have been that, but it wasn't really. And so that's the thing that we're trying to figure out is strategic surprise is terrible. So how do we have resiliency, whether it's in our ag system, whether it's in how we respond to these kinds of things, whether it's how we regulate, right? Are we ready for a world where AI-driven drugs are just constantly being discovered? I mean, there's the AI for science and autonomous science systems are going to happen, and we have no idea. And I'm very optimistic about all these things. But I'm the optimist in the security community, which is a rare breed. But we really have, that's what we think about and want to prepare for, and how do we make sure that we can be ready for biology's ChatGPT moment, because no one knows what that thing will be.
Mm-hmm. It gives us a lot to think about for the future. We're here in Washington, and so I would love to hear if you had, each of you, one wish or a magic wand to be able to make something happen that could advance your work, or if there is one thing that you really want policymakers and legislators to understand about this intersection of AI and biotechnology, what would it be? Let's start with Raphael and then move down.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record at this point, but it's really things like the recommendation on the web of biological data, right? This ability to build these kinds of data sets is what's going to enable these kinds of applications. And so sustained focus in investment on those kind of almost grand challenges of data, on these like strategic data reserves, essentially, to build these kinds of information is really critical. I definitely, we talked about China, we see these kind of efforts coming out of there. I know a lot of my sort of fellow research colleagues see these kind of efforts, these focused efforts to build these kinds of data sets to enable these kind of ChatGPT-esque moments in biology. And while I agree that we don't really know what that moment is exactly going to look like, it's unquestionable that, that information is what is going to power those kinds of breakthroughs. And so whoever owns those data sets is going to own the keys to the kingdom. And so making that kind of sustained focused investment on building foundational data sets is really the dream that I have at the end of the day. It's like, can we actually enable that? Can we enable other sort of breakthroughs like the ChatGPT or AlphaFold in the biology side of things in biotechnology more broadly through those kinds of focused investments?
So one of the things we think about a lot is how we protect the innovation that we have and how we best enable farmers here in the United States. And I spoke earlier about China and their investment in agriculture. Right now, they are dependent on US farmers for their food security. And they know it, and they have publicly stated that they are making investments so that they are self-sufficient. And it's a leverage point that we have right now because of that dependency. Part of the challenge is grain is regulated. And when you start talking about our different technologies, you have to go through import approval processes. And right now in China, they want companies like ours to not only send them our complete and detailed blueprint for exactly what we did, but they want us to also send a significant amount of grain with it. It is ripe for technology transfer, and this is going directly to the government. We have to figure out a way to protect innovation here and make sure that it's not at the expense of limiting US agriculture's ability to take advantage of this innovation at scale. So that would be my wish, is to help solve some of these challenges and make sure that we're doing everything we can to really use this technology and innovation and advance agriculture in a meaningful way so that we never have to worry about food security here in this country.
I actually have 50 wishes. They're outlined in that little booklet on your
We
table.
might have time for 3.
But the thing I want to point out with the reason I bring up 50 is, I'm not just joking, is there are 11 commissioners, 4 members of Congress from both houses, from the House and the Senate, from Republicans and Democrats, and 7 heavily opinionated people who've talked to over 1,800 experts. And that group agreed on 50 goals. That is not a small feat. So just for context of everyone, we love the yes ands, but just understand that that is a feat in itself in this town. But if I had to have my one, pick your favorite child moment, so we recommend a national parks project. I grew up in the Northwest. I'm very much an outdoorsy person. So we recommend that there is a sequencing effort that is part of kind of public education and take advantage of the biodiversity in our country by sequencing, flora and fauna and microbes and little samples of water and fungi and things like that, so that we could have this, treasure trove of American biodiversity for things to pull from. And the story that I have been telling for 6 years now is Ed Yong from The Atlantic wrote a really great article, probably 7 years ago, about a young woman in the UK was dying from an incurable infection, antibiotic resistance infection. They contacted a professor in Pennsylvania who had been spent his career collecting and curating phage genomes. And I'm sure everyone knows, but phages are viruses that infect bacteria. And they found a phage that made sense. They engineered it into a model organism and then used it as a phage therapy to cure her infection. But the best part of the story is the genome that they found, that they used, was found by a South African high school student in their compost pile on a rotting eggplant that they did for a science project. That ended up in a database that saved a woman's life, right? That's the data that we can't predict what it's going to be useful and when. But biodiversity in a whole bunch of different areas literally saves lives at times. So if I had my personal, and I also personally want to volunteer to go collect all the data. And I've got the RV already booked up and I'm going to hit the road. If anyone wants to join me, I'm from Washington, so North Cascades National Park is the good place to start.
That's an incredible example, and I think really highlights one of the other core inputs in addition to data and collaboration, and that's talent, and making sure that we are able to attract and maintain talent from everywhere, and make sure that we also have the ability to share information with collaborators in all parts of the world, because science exists everywhere and we don't know where that plant species is going to come from or where that bacteria is going to come from that really can revolutionize how we cure disease or keep everyone fed. So I'll just add that as well as one thing that we're certainly thinking about for our companies is how can we keep and maintain the best talent. Yeah. Well, I know we're the last thing standing between everyone and lunch, so thank you all for joining me today. This has been a great discussion and really highlights both the opportunities in this space, what advances can come from the intersection of AI and biotech, and also some of the challenges that prevent us from really realizing that opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for lunch, which can be found outside the main ballroom. Our afternoon session will begin at 12:50.